Welcome to Peace Freqs, a parenting and family podcast for the freaks, geeks, nerds, and weirdos, the outcasts who went on and had their own. We're used to being the exception to the rule, so come along with us as we try to also live exceptionally. We're here to help make you the best version of your freaky family. Welcome, Ryan, to Peace Freqs.
Thank you.
I'm Nikki P. Here with my lovely wife and co-host Lizzie. This is a new format for us, so we're just kind of getting our sea legs and seeing how things work out. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, more importantly, your family?
All right. Ryan Burgett. I'm, in my mid-30s, a software developer. That's how I, make money. Been married for 15 years, have 5 children, lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania ever since we got married, but just this year moved out to rural Florida, where we're going to be setting up our homestead in the near future. We homeschool our kids, and I'm also a ordained minister in the Mennonite church, and we're going to be starting a kind of a digital/analog church plant down here at some point. So, was
that right, Liz? Which one did I say he was? I knew it was one of the weird ones. They're the other Amish.
No, you said Mennonite. It's not that weird, but yeah, no, you said. I think initially you were saying maybe something more towards Amish, yeah, and then Mennonite, and then I looked into Quakerism at one point. So
he's not the Quaker.
I was almost the Quaker.
Really?
Yeah, I was in the evangelical church for a long time.
Okay.
And then in 2008, I voted for John McCain.
Okay.
And I stepped out of the polling place. And the minute I stepped out of there, I just felt this sinking feeling in my gut. And I just went, what is wrong with me? That is a horrible person who's going to do horrible things. And I suddenly just went first of all, I thought, I hope he doesn't get into office because I don't want to be responsible for whatever he does in office. And then my second thought was, what is so broken inside of me that I would just be morally able to walk in and pull the lever for that guy? And then, and justify it in my brain somehow. So I stepped away from politics and just decided to kind of dive into reading and study. And I got deep into Rothbard, love Rothbard. And so much of what he was saying was rocking my world. And especially when I was reading about early American history, where you have the Pilgrims who were, literally killing people who disagreed with them, the Quakers. And, heaven forbid you say that you can have a personal individual relationship with God. Society will fall apart unless the church has dictatorial control over people's lives.
Yeah.
Blasphemer.
That whole thing.
Witch.
I know, but I read that and I thought, oh my goodness, I don't want to be like that. Because my whole life I'd been, the reformers and the Puritans and these guys are kind of the best of the best. You need to memorize the Puritan prayers because they're just the most heartfelt, deep, good. I'm like, when they weren't doing their beautiful Puritan prayers, you realize they were murdering people.
Yeah.
Or stripping women topless and tying them to the back of carts and driving them around town to humiliate them because they had a Bible study that wasn't sanctioned by the church, or taking a family and putting them in the middle of the woods with the natives that they had just slaughtered recently and then leaving the family there to be murdered. These are the same people we're lifting up. So then once again, I had a second moment of, what am I, what's so broken in my brain? So I was just, either way,
You were having a lot of existential crises all at once.
I know. And it was also, this is simultaneously around the time my first child was born. And
okay.
Oh, that explains everything.
Yeah, right.
So things, a lot happens when that happens.
Yeah.
So.
Well, everyone always jokes that when you get married, it changes everything. Which I will tell everyone is a stupid thing to say because it only changes if you want it to. And I feel like you don't renegotiate a contract after you just signed it. So generally the idea of the contract is to lock in the deal that you've already prearranged. Otherwise, what was the whole dating thing about before the marriage? But kids, on the other hand, will change absolutely everything absolutely immediately. And it is very, very intense. I got interested in politics again after a 15-year hiatus because I had a kid.
Yeah.
And then I'm freaking out oh my God, what kind of world are we leaving these people? We got to change everything now. I've ignored this too long.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
So here's the first question. When I think Mennonite, erroneously perhaps, I immediately think they're the other Amish.
Right.
Which I guess the Mennonites I knew growing up, that's basically what they were. Like, you're like, why are you not Amish? Like, everything you do sounds Amish. But you apparently are fairly tech savvy. You managed to log onto Zoom and talk to me. You look like you're living in a fairly modern home. So what am I wrong?
Well, let me just finish my story and say that as I was reading Rothbard and doing all these other things, I was also in the New Testament a whole lot. And what I started finding was these guys, like what Jesus was saying and what Rothbard's pointing out here, like they mesh. Because Rothbard, you could see the obvious agenda as he's writing his story about the Puritans and what they were doing. You know, I was looking at that story and saying, I don't ever want to be like those people.
Yeah.
I would much rather be the people who are just doing what's right, standing for individual liberty, and, you know, take whatever comes. Like the people who, you know, we're not going to wear a hat because, you know, wearing a hat is deference to the local government. And it's dishonest because we follow Jesus. That's what the Quakers said. To which then the Puritans are like, well, we're going to violently, attack you because you're not, showing your servitude toward the state.
Damn fealty.
But I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be those people. I want to be the other ones. I want to be the ones who won't wear their hat or who host Bible studies even though the government says not to. So then you read what Jesus has to say and you're like, see, what he's saying is the opposite of what the Puritans and those Reformed folks were doing at that time.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I'm seeing a connection here. So I was like, I want to be like those people. So who are they? Oh, Quakers. Let's read. So I started getting into Quaker history, learning all about the Quakers, and I was very impressed. And I love so much of what they have. But as I was reading about them, I remembered, what was that group that I read about as a child? The Anabaptists. That's who they were. And the Anabaptists were the radical reformers, so-called, during the Reformation. You had all the other reformers, the big name ones who broke from the Catholic Church, and they basically set up their own Catholic church-ish type setups. And then the Anabaptists came along and they, to a large extent, we didn't all agree, but to a large extent, at least the first time they codified what they believed, it was, we believe in the ban, as in if you do something that's against the church or against what we teach or against the Bible or something that's going to hurt the community, we will ban you. As in, we were going to cut off association with you. This was in stark contrast to the Catholic Church, which is, if you do something against us, we will kill you. So it's like voluntary association. There we go. I like that. And then it goes through, the sword. Like, we don't see the sword as a legitimate way to interact with humanity. And I'm like, yes, that's it. Yes, that's not a legitimate way. We interact voluntarily. Like, we don't kill each other. That's not how adults act. That's how children act. I don't like you.
I'm going to be honest. I'm not even sure all children act that way unless you teach them to act that way.
Very good point. Yep. But at the same time, immaturity in general causes you to generally act, not necessarily violently, but act out in, ways like that. But still. So I looked at the Quakers and them, and, I kind of found myself drifting more toward the Anabaptists. Now, the Anabaptists, they went off a number of different directions. And that's what happens when you have decentralized groups, because they were killed by both the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay. The Reformers, they were drowned by Zwingli and the guys. Everyone loves Zwingli. He would drown people because they didn't want to take up the sword.
Yeah.
Or because they thought that, or they read correctly in the Bible that baptism is an expression of faith, not a entrance into the state religion, which happens at birth. But, heaven forbid you say those things.
Did you get like a Che Guevara vibe from him? Nobody's putting him on t-shirts.
Well, lots of people, are happy. If you follow Christian groups, Reformed groups, they're all into Zwingli or Calvin, also a murderer.
Sorry, I just think to myself, it's like, that whole Che Guevara, everyone looks up to the guy even though he's murdering gay people.
Oh, yeah. Che Guevara. Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, that's a great example.
Great man, murdered lots of gay people.
People have this funny way where they do that. They're like, oh yeah, and they murdered people. In my brain, when you're murdering people, that disqualifies you in general from being a great person. Now, you might be able to learn from that person's life, and they might even reform and come around and, be a better person later on in life. But that doesn't undo their past. It's always going to be there, or at least be part of the story.
Well, it's always the frustrating thing. Certainly, you look in the past. I've had so many people, well, you can't, that person's racist, so you can't listen to anything they say. I'm like, well, that doesn't follow. They have like one really shitty idea, doesn't undo the possibility they had many great ideas.
Right.
And especially when you look into something like racism, which is the norm for most of human history. It's a stupid caveman idea, but so I'm going to get rid of all of philosophy because those dudes were fucking terrible. I don't know if I can do that. Yeah, you have to pick and choose what's valuable and what's not valuable out of people's canon. And racism is something I'm happy to get rid of personally, but
Well, and if you don't listen to what people have to say, then all you have to go on is other people's caricatures of what they have to say. For example, the racists. If you don't listen, if you don't know if you don't interact with some people in that category.
Well, you've read Rothbard, so clearly you're racist.
Of course, white supremacist, right? But yeah.
I mean, I get called it all the time. We're good.
But I've also read Zwingli and I've read Calvin, and I know what these guys have to say, and I disagree with them on a doctrinal, theological level. But it's what they did in real life that ultimately turns me off to their message.
Yeah.
But not the Mennonites, the Anabaptists, they were pushed off to the edges of society. They ended up living, in self-sustaining communities in the deep in the woods, alone, apart from everybody else. And what happens is when you have separated groups living off on their own, separated from society, doing their own thing, is you have people who kind of evolve in different ways. It's not like when you have out in the open one big centralized group who just does their thing. And what came out of this time was you ended up with a bunch of these different, Anabaptist groups. There were Mennonites who were kind of inspired by Menno Simmons. There were Hutterites. Hutterites are still around today as well. They're in the UK. They're communists, but like legit nonviolent ones. They voluntarily live together and share all their stuff, and they just exist. So if anybody says that, by the way, communism can't exist apart from, violence. Well, I mean, communal living does exist, and it is a thing. And people can voluntarily choose to not hold private property. They can voluntarily choose to do that way. It might not be the best, and, there'll be a little tiny community that's not, the ones pushing technology forward, but it is what it is.
Interesting.
It's never proven to be scalable as its big issue.
Yeah. But in a small community where you have these people who agreed to live this way, it just works. So there's the Hutterites. They're
homogeneity of ideas is really the most important. It works until you have people that don't accept it as it is, and then it quickly degenerates.
Yeah.
But that kind of goes with everything else. Probably the biggest problem with our nation now is trying to cobble together people that think that the other people are evil. The idea...
Force everybody together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine looking at these, the 50 states?
Yeah.
You can even go to the state level, but even it goes so much deeper than that. But
yeah,
if you just want to look at the states, it doesn't even make sense. The priorities of somebody in California are so different from the priorities of somebody in, Tennessee or Ohio.
Yeah.
Or New York as opposed to Arizona. People need different things. They're looking for different things.
Here, let's make it even more specific. New York State versus New York City, because I can speak on it because I grew up there.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, the people in New York have nothing in common with the people in New York City.
Yeah.
Yep. I know exactly what you mean.
And yet New York City makes all the decisions for everything that happens in the rest of the state.
Yeah, that's the way it is in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, the people it's a quote unquote red state. It's full of generally people who just want to be left alone and do their thing, which that's good. Not voting for Republicans in a federal office. That's not good.
Wolf ain't doing that. I'll tell you that much.
But that whole, the idea of just kind of let us be, let us do our thing. That's good. And the majority of the people in the state are like that.
Yeah.
And yet you have 2 or 3 cities, but basically Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, who just run things. It's ugh, why do you force us to associate?
It is frustrating.
So much of that.
But the Amish were the third branch.
Okay.
Or, the third big ones. They have the
Okay.
Mennonites, the Hutterites, and the Amish. There's a couple others. I mean, even Baptists technically came from them
Yeah.
in their own, eventually down the road. Quakers as well. But yeah, and they each went kind of their own ways. We still have the Amish who still live separated from society, which that goes all the way back to when they were persecuted, by the church. They just kept living that way all these years later. So 500 something years later. And then you have the Hutterites doing their thing. You have the Mennonites. Now the Mennonites, it's really cool, but it's bottom up rather than top down. Every other denomination you come to, there's the denomination at the top and they make the rules for everybody down below,
Okay.
What happens in the Mennonite church is each church is autonomous. So it's its own body.
Oh.
And then they group together into a federation of conferences. And then they voluntarily choose which conference they want to be a part of. So then you have these conferences, which are each very different because people group together, based on what they believe. And you have some which are more strict and you have some which are more traditional and some which are wildly progressive, Bernie Sanders supporting people. Like you have all these different groups in these conferences. And then those conferences federate together into the denomination. So the denomination at the top actually has the least power.
Huh.
So the denomination just is a loose federation of the conferences, which are a federation of autonomous bodies at the bottom, I love that so much because that's exactly, power does flow from the bottom. It does flow from people up or people out. Authority on the very top is just made up power because ultimately it's just because people agree that it exists, rather than that they've actually earned it, as opposed to in your congregation. Yes, if you're you can actually earn authority and earn a place to have something to say. But yeah, so it's nifty. But because of the bottom up way that you have things, the Mennonite church is so broad.
Yeah.
Because when you don't have that top down pushing homogeneity, you have very different groups. So yeah, it's neat though, because when you have Mennonite service projects, you will have somebody over here from a church who doesn't believe that women should be able to teach in the church, super weirdo traditional. And then you have over here working right next to them is a woman pastor. And you want to know the cool thing? They will serve together, helping people, even though they disagree on that. And that makes me happy. And that's one of the biggest draws that brought me into the Mennonite church. I'm like, I don't agree with a lot of some of these people over here. I don't agree with everything with these people over here. But that kind of attitude, that bottom up thing where we kind of each do kind of our own thing, but we come together and get past our differences in order to serve people and do good. That rocks my world. I wanted to be a part of that.
That is immensely interesting because, I've been in a couple of independent bodies in the Protestant church and kind of then had sort of my midlife crisis of faith, however you want to talk about it, and went back into Catholic history and tried to figure out, kind of from the ground up, what do I believe and where would I fit into a body? And so I've come across a lot of these ideas of the Anabaptists, mostly from the Catholic history bent. So it's interesting to hear it from the other side, kind of. Yeah, no, very cool.
Well, so we've ended up talking about religion a lot of the recent episodes. We had Q the Abolitionist on, which was a great conversation. And I grew up Catholic and think in terms of Catholic history as well. One of the big jokes I've always made is that Liz never considered Catholicism Christianity. And to me, I'm like, but I mean, it's actual Christianity. It's the whole thing. You're the bastard children of Christianity. You came from that. So you're part of that.
Well, that was how I was raised. So
well, and once again, that's how I was raised.
I mean, you could also say that the Catholic Church is the bastard son of the state. So I think that would be more accurate.
Well, and that's when we were talking. When talking to Q, he's a Baptist, and the particular sect of Baptist that he is he's like, well, I mean, he's a Christianity, the idea, the concept predates Catholicism. Catholicism is the idea of a state power co-opting the religion. So his particular Baptist sect, they would consider themselves as going back to the religion that existed before the state took over Catholicism and it became, the Holy Roman Empire essentially. And that was something it had never crossed my mind. I think, that's right. Like it would have been the beliefs or whatever it would have started small. It would have been a thing. And,
until Augustine, man,
Yeah.
until Augustine, there were things that basically Christianity across the board held to, which all disappeared. And one of the biggest ones was nonviolence, nonviolent interaction. Like you don't use the sword to accomplish anything, which is what Jesus taught, which is you don't, kill the person who's, exactly. You don't use the sword. You don't use violence to accomplish your means. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in the Bible, when they're coming to arrest Jesus, as portrayed in the Bible, is perfect. Jesus is perfect, the perfect Son of God, like never done anything wrong in his life. And here's these people coming with swords and torches, and they're going to arrest him and try and put him to death. Okay, they are committing violence against an innocent person, the most innocent person literally in the history of the world. So then Peter pulls out his sword to defend Jesus.
Right.
That is the most justified moment to use violence in the history of the world, is when they're coming to arrest Jesus. You cannot get more justified than in that specific moment. And that's the moment where Jesus decides to do an object lesson. And when Peter swings his sword, he says, whoa, put away your sword, Peter. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. As in contrasting his way from the way of the world. The world around you, they're the ones who swing swords to get done what they want to get done. But guess what? He picks up the dude's ear, he puts it back on. He's like, my way's different. Like we heal people, we help people. Put away your sword. We don't do that here. And people in the church took that literally. And that is correct.
Yeah.
Because Jesus was so clear with what he taught. And that's the better way. Jesus said, you've heard it said to those of old, talking about Mosaic law and other things, you've heard it said to those of old, but I tell you. He was contrasting himself with the state, contrasting himself with that way of thinking. Okay? So yes, if you're contrasting yourself with the state, then part of that is contrasting yourself with using the sword as a legitimate means of getting done what you want to get done.
Well, we have to cut him a little bit of leeway. If you've read the Old Testament, it does seem like violence is the solution to most problems.
Well, the Old Testament was a learning time. The Old Testament, people tried. Like they had a good strict law, and they tried to force everybody with violence to hold up to it. And what happened after doing that for how many hundreds of years, whatever? Did it make them happy? Were they
good.
peaceful?
No.
Were they, prosperous? Did they get what they were looking for? No, they didn't. It was a failed experiment, just like all states in all of history. They are all exercises in violence, and they're all failed experiments, which is why, as a Christian, I want to be part of something better. And the early Christians all did hold that as a primary to being of following Jesus, is not using violence against people.
Yeah.
So they didn't get involved in government. They didn't do any of that until the church wanted political power. And the state actually wanted to use the church to get people into its program. So they specifically hired Augustine to rewrite doctrine and make it so that the church could then, with a clean conscience, become wards of the state.
So I know that's been a lot of history, folks. So the question I want to ask is, now, if anyone hasn't grasped, I'm getting the impression that Ryan is a pacifist. I'm not sure where I fall on that spectrum. I, at the very least, tend to lean towards pacifism. I don't really know that violence ever could solve anything. What I will say is that the desire for human preservation tends to kick in, and that is usually the easiest tool to grab the quickest, as far as to try and save yourself. But
yep,
how is it raising a family with those kind of views in the modern age?
Yeah, well.
Well, conservatives certainly don't get it. My parents definitely haven't got it in the past.
You mean the people that read Modern Age don't get it?
But seriously, the concept of using, first of all, as adults, like if you and I disagreed, we wouldn't kill each other. Hopefully not. If we would, we'd be barbarians.
Well, unless you're like a horrible neocon trying to kill people in the Middle East, and then we may have to.
Well, in that case, it'd be justified, but still, it wouldn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do.
And really, it's not really, he's trying to stop them.
Yeah. We don't bring violence into regular adult, interactions.
Right.
We disagree, and we might argue. We might share some, meme to really make our point, and then, very adult. But still, even like the least adult thing you could do, the least whatever thing you could do is to start, killing somebody. Or when you have the chest beaters, hey, meet me outside. Pfft, grow up, man. Come on. But like, what do you do when you take a child and you're like, I'm going to beat you to do what's right. I'm telling you what's right. And because I'm bigger than you, like, I'm allowed to hit you to make you do what I want you to do. Like, the kid just learns to, okay, so you're bigger. You're allowed to hurt me.
You just taught him to be a neocon.
Yeah, you're big. You're allowed to hurt me. And, okay, and then when I get bigger than people, I can hurt them to...
Yeah.
It turns everything upside down.
Well, what it does, if nothing else, if you're going to strip away all of it, it introduces the concept of justified violence.
Right.
Yep.
And that is part and parcel, like the whole neocon concept, is that it's going to take this violence to fix these problems over in the Middle East, wherever it is, Venezuela, South America. The concept is that they genuinely believe at their core, probably because they were fucking spanked as kids, because I've watched adults justify all sorts of violence because their parents did it to them.
Police violence as well. They're the grown-ups. So they're the adults in this situation, so we have to defer to their authority.
In all of these situations, people justify violence as a way to solve the problem strictly because it's been done this way. It's what we've done. It took not a long while, but it definitely took some time to kind of work through the whole peaceful parenting thing.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of like, and I'd hem and I'd haw and I'd like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I luckily ran into some patient people when I was interested in asking questions, and they were frankly not complete assholes about it, because sometimes those people are just total dicks. And so for me, eventually I stepped back and I looked at the questions that I'm asking people, and the bottom line is, at no point have I ever really felt the need to lay a hand on my child. I've never seen her do anything that's so fucking wrong that it required force.
When they turn off the modem, though.
No, never.
Yeah, right.
I'd been trying to sync this one blockchain, and it was just about done, and then all of a sudden, all the internet goes out, and it's like,
oh no,
no. I didn't hit the child for the record, and I wouldn't, but. Boy, those are the times where you're just like...
Good to ignore that the programming's there, where you feel like that's the necessary thing.
Yeah, well, seriously, programming is a big part of it. Because that's seen as a valid go-to for so long.
Well, and what I eventually came to is the idea, it's like everything I'm asking, like I was just getting into the most insane, esoteric-y kind of... basically I got to the point where like it could only work on a mentally handicapped child, and the bottom line was everything that you need to use violence for was an example of you having not done the right thing in the first place.
Probably
you had not set the child up for success in the situation, and you'd created a problem for yourself.
Yep.
That yes, maybe the only solution is violence at this point. But that's because you didn't do the right thing in the first place.
Right.
Yes, if you have to tackle the child in the middle of a road to get them out of like oncoming traffic, well, what the hell is the kid doing in the middle of the road in the first place? So, like, why would you let your mentally handicapped child get?
Yes, and that's the go-to example. That is the go-to example. Oh my goodness, I've heard so many people say that.
Really?
You're telling me that you wouldn't use force if your child ran out in the street? I'm like,
right.
Are you really going there?
Why is my kid in the middle of the street?
Oh, yeah.
And I just had to be honest with myself. Like everything that I was coming up with, I mean, this is so unlikely to happen. And even if it did, like I was a problem I should have done in the first place. If you get to a point where you have to yell at your kid to teach them something, well, what didn't you teach them in the first place? You know, what didn't they learn? It was definitely a difficult transition. It's on my mind because I was talking to one of our listeners, a good friend of the show, Jacob, about he's having difficulty with the peaceful parenting thing, and I'd mentioned to him like, well, I want to talk about my transition, I guess, because to me it was definitely someone who had ways to justify, and that's all it is. It was justifying. I guess the way people my parents had treated me. No, I don't think my parents are evil or nothing. Like, bottom line is that you're indoctrinated from a very young age, basically from birth. What the fuck's the first thing a doctor does? You're born and slaps you in the fucking ass.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea. But, that's programming. And you can separate the programming from the person to a degree. Now, if people refuse to kind of learn from reality and choose to rely only on their programming, well, that's another matter entirely.
Yeah.
They need to get the Spankings Create Neocon stickers made, Liz. I'm telling you. They're gonna be selling like hotcakes.
That would be a very good bumper sticker.
Does nothing good for the relationship either. So that was kind of the turnoff for me.
I mean, I've honestly never really talked to you about like the whole about corporal punishment in your family.
Oh no, it was definitely a thing. That I
have difficulty imagining anyone in your family.
I know, right? But because of the religious, well, I think that might have been sort of the what it came to in my particular branch of the family, because we got to the point where my brothers are, the big dudes, like you can't really spank them. And that happened when they were like 15 or something. Like, that became not a useful tool. And that's the other thing about corporal punishment. Like after a certain point, it's no longer a useful tool for you, because if that, child is young enough to be concerned about the pain of a spanking, then you're setting yourself up for an actual like physical altercation with this person. And, at a certain point, especially in my mom's case, you get to the point where that person is actually stronger than you. But yeah, no. And she was very much from the spare the rod, spoil the child, sort of school of thought. And I heard a lot of that when we were starting to raise our child. So, I think I might have tried spanking one time. Like we were literally on my way to my parents' house, my grandparents' house, on a train, and she was being very disruptive. And I tried it, and it just made the relationship between me and her so, I don't know, just bad. It immediately sort of put this dark cloud on the way that we related. And she wasn't very old. She's probably like 2. And that was the one time that I tried it. And then I had to kind of work out all of that, her wanting to be violent just because of that one encounter. And it didn't help me to, discipline her at all in a way of actually teaching her that kind of discipling. It really literally just, was an expression of my frustration in that moment. And then, it didn't have any good outcomes other than that. So yeah, it really.
And what are we saying if like that's your reaction in the moment as an adult to a child is,
well, no, absolutely.
I'm frustrated and I'm going to hit you. I'm bigger than you and fuck you.
Yeah. There's nothing good that comes from that.
See, that shows something broken in us.
So that sort of solidified that in my mind, that I was able to, in the subsequent years when I hear that from my mom, I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I get it. That's where you're from. But, I understand viscerally why that's not an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so Irma's 6. Like, I mean, how often do you feel a need to hit her anymore?
Yeah, no, I've never felt the need to resort to that since, because it was just so ineffective, and I learned so much more from actually trying to relate to my child.
Oh, good God, talking to this person is useful.
But even apart from like the spanking itself, like you mentioned earlier, you put yelling at your kids in that same category. That reactive kind of childish way of responding to things that are going on. And that fits exactly in what you're saying here. Like, we've went through a big move and everything in the midst of the COVID and all the crazy stuff, but lots of stress. And I have not been interacting well with anybody in the family. Been quite a bit of yelling on my part, which is not good. But the thing is, once again, that's not because of them. And it's not because of Hannah. that's something wrong with me that I need to work on right now.
Yeah.
If you're yelling at the kids, and if you're hitting the kids, and if you're hitting your spouse or yelling at your spouse, like if you're, well, by the way, I don't hit my spouse either. Just for the context. But seriously, if that's what you're doing, there's something wrong with you. Like you have to work on that. Like I know I need to work on some things right now. Like that's how this works.
I feel the need to tell our listeners that was a callback to before the show started when I mentioned to Ryan that I made sure that he.
Oh, was that before the show?
Technically.
Okay.
Back when, I was playing Chris Brown to acclimate him to our environment and commenting on Chris Brown beating up Rihanna.
Oh, right.
He didn't feel the need to just justify his violence against his wife because, it's dirty on his conscience. It was a joke.
Well, as soon as I said that, I was like, oh, this didn't come out right at all. But no.
I do not believe the pacifist beats his wife.
I was saying that I've been raising my voice to my family, and that is not good. And it's not a sign that they've been worse or they've changed.
Right.
It's a sign that I've not been handling, what's going on internally well right now. So,
well, that's interesting. Like I'm lucky in that my dad was far more insidious than that as a person, and so we don't raise our voice in our family really at all.
That's good
because it's way more like if someone's pissed off, it's way more
intimidating.
No, it's not intimidating. It just it pisses them off way more.
It makes it worse. It turns you against each other. Yeah.
Well, no. If somebody's pissed off, it's really, really infuriating when you keep your cool and they can't. So it makes them even angrier. And I was just taught to really, really press that needle in. So if they're angry, make them angrier. So I'm really good at keeping my cool no matter what anyone else is doing or saying. It becomes also more disarming because Irma, I don't understand what it is. I don't know what it is, but she'll just start freaking out, crying. Like you don't even have to threaten her or get aggro with her. Just the idea that she did something wrong, she'll start bawling. And what could be a teachable moment is 20 minutes of me like, Irma, why are you crying? Like this isn't something to cry about. Mm-hmm. We're just having a conversation. I'm trying to teach you something to do better. And you won't stop crying. I can't possibly get to the yelling phase because I'm already in triage mode because the kid started crying before I could even tell her she did anything wrong. It's weird. Mm-hmm. Kids are weird. I will say that. Maybe that's just how a learned defense mechanism is if you disarm daddy before he can yell. I don't know.
I mean, if it works.
So why don't we've reached the point where I don't want to edit anymore in the recording. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where people can catch you if they want to hear more about what you're doing?
Well, you can go to technoagorist.com if you want to see my podcast episodes. That's always fun. You can find me on Twitter, technoagorist. Also, I make computer software, burgettdev.net. That's BURGETTDEV.net. That's how you can find me and contact me if you want me to make you software. So, fun stuff. And then we're working on a neat, like I said, a sort of decentralized church plant type thing, which is called Rubric right now. And the website is rubric.church, but can't do much there. Right now we have prayers and Bible readings.
Rubric?
Okay. .church. Yep. And we have a app on the Android store, not an iOS yet. Rubric. But that's the first step toward what we're working towards.
Well, I'm glad that having kids in the family has not stopped your desire to be ambitious and do things, because you clearly have a lot of things on your plate there, boss.
Yeah. Also bring up MLGAnetwork.com, of course, which Cam and I run, and we produce a number of podcasts, including our own. Yay!
Always happy to plug you guys.
Well, we're always happy for the plugs.
If you folks want to learn more, you can always go check out the show notes. Go and check out what we're about on Peace Freqs. And if you like what you're hearing here, hit subscribe. Go head on over to iTunes and give us a rating and review so that other people can learn about what we're talking about here, which apparently today is literally fitting into the name, the Peace Freqs. Because this guy definitely, I'm sorry, I'll say Mennonite's pretty freaky of a thing. So, plus he's talking on pacifism. I think that's right on brand, right?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much for coming on, Ryan.
My pleasure.
You have yourself a good one, and everyone out there, y'all have a good one as well. This podcast is a proud creation of the Mad Audio Lab. For more information, check out madaudiolab.com. Peace Freqs is part of the Liberty Hippie Podcast Network. If you like what we do, be sure to check out Homesteads and Homeschools, Free Markets Green Earth, Cannabis Heals Me, and This Week in Liberpods. We're living proof that libertarian doesn't mean washed up Republican.